Hey, well, it's great to see you all again this evening. We're going to continue our study this evening in Revelation. We wanted to just mix it up a little bit tonight if we could. So we had a short time of worship, and then we're going to have a chance to talk about some of the things we've been looking at in Revelation over the last couple of weeks, because somebody who shall remain nameless confessed to me this week that they may or may not have fallen asleep during last week's sermon. And yes, it's good to know there's grace and mercy in the church. But no, that is great. But we're just aware that, like we're doing this in the evenings, primarily to the kids, and we've got the kids stuff in the morning and the evening, and it can get a bit tiresome late in the evening. So we thought we'd try and get the Revelation bit on earlier so we can do something a bit different with it afterwards. But we're going to be in chapters 12 to 14 tonight, and we're going to be looking at that subject. And so I wanted, I'm aware that every week I think it's really good just to sort of understand where we are, because going into Revelation is a little bit like swimming out into the sea, right? Or rowing out to sea. At the beginning, chapters 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, 5, you're still in the bay and it's kind of okay. And then you start going past that and you can very, very quickly get lost. And many people have drowned. So I'm trying to give a bit of an overview. So really, the first thing that we need to understand is that it's just to remind you, this is a letter. So the book of Revelation is a letter. It's written as a letter, and it's written by a guy called John to 7 churches. These were 7 churches that lived and were real churches in probably kind of somewhere like Turkey. And there was a problem. These churches were under pressure. They were under a lot of pressure at the time, and they were under pressure from external sources of persecution. So just to highlight the 12 apostles, those people that followed Jesus around, Peter was crucified upside down by this point. Andrew had been crucified. Thomas had been apparently stabbed with 4 spears. James was clubbed to death and stoned. Matthias was burned alive. And as we know, Paul, the Apostle Paul, died in Rome. So John was one of the last Christian apostles. It was the last apostle still alive probably at this point. And there were just awful things that have been happening to the Christians, in this time. The Nero, as we're going to look at Nero the emperor had used to string up Christians and burn them alive as torchlights on the way into Rome. And that's why he used to feed them to the lions. This was horrendously difficult. To be a Christian these days, it literally meant costing you your life. But it wasn't just that. There was also real pressure to compromise. There was pressure to give in. And we saw that in chapters 2 and 3. That if Jesus was speaking to the church and saying, don't give in to the worldly ways of thinking. Don't try and mix, Jesus's teaching and the Christianity with things from the world. Don't do it. And so essentially the whole book of Revelation can be summed up as really 2 simple messages written to ordinary Christians like you and me. And it's this: don't give up. Don't give up. Even under real pressure, don't give up. But equally, don't give in. Don't just give in to the world and go for what's easy. Don't just do that. And what we see, and there's lots of pictures in Revelation, and it's kind of very complicated. We need to understand that primarily when we're reading this book, and when we read the symbols that are in this book, it would have made a lot more sense, right, to Christians 2,000 years ago than it does today, right? Because a lot of the symbols they would have recognized. Remember last week I talked about the number 9/11. Like if we say 9/11 in 1,000 years time, that might not mean very much, but it means a lot to us. But the thing about Revelation is that although it speaks to Christians 2,000 years ago, and the symbols are very much that they would understand, it equally is like it speaks to us today. It has this thing. And so what we see is that Revelation is like a symbolic vision for every generation of the church. Right, what you have is what it shows is history's pattern, and in history's pattern we see death, we see greed, we see war, and really what we're seeing in Revelation is that the master behind it all is the devil. It's Satan. That's his plan, right? His plan is very destructive for the world, but that he's been doing this for a long time. And this is what the book of Revelation shows us. It shows us, he was doing that kind of stuff then. And actually we can apply this today and see it's still happening today. And really every kingdom, every worldly empire is really just another iteration, another illustration of the same thing that we see in this book. But equally, the book of Revelation reveals that God's promises are true as much as they were back then. So we see that the promise of being in heaven, the promise of God, Jesus, the Lamb of God, taking away our sins and taking away and coming to save us, that Jesus will return and bring justice for all of those things that have been so bad. And so when we read Revelation, we're sort of seeing, and particularly as we get into 12 and 14, which is quite difficult, we need to see it as, oh, this is like a pattern that speaks to us today. And although, you know, we're going to talk about people like Nero today, actually there's lots of Neros. There's Neros in every generation, right? There's people that represent, they're almost representatives that carry on through the ages. So let me just give you a little bit overview just to back up where we are. So in chapter 1, John, the Apostle John, meets Jesus, and he's like blown away by the majesty and the awesomeness of Jesus. And then Jesus speaks very specifically to these 7 churches. And like we looked at those letters, we could say, well, it was speaking to those 7 churches, but actually there's so many things there that are still relevant today to our church. And then John was taken up to the throne room. And really, this is the starting point of the rest of the book. And the throne room of God, chapter 4 and 5, we see God on his throne, and we see the Lamb who is slain, right? And we see that the Lamb is worthy to open the scroll. And then what happens is we're about to see a series of different visions that basically tell the same story again and again from different angles. And so the first one we looked at was what Mark shared a few weeks ago, which was about the 7 seals. And that's chapters 6 to 9. And what we see is that God is pouring out the scrolls, reveal God's sort of judging, bringing justice to the earth for all the things that have gone wrong. But what's revealed is the church. We start to see the church. Oh, the church is God's plan for salvation. And we read that every tribe and nation and tongue become the church. And despite all of the suffering, the difficulties, the church that rises up through it. And last week, we looked at the 7 trumpets. And again, that was chapters 9 to 11. And we saw again the trumpets signal bad things happening. But really, it's showing the church. We saw the 2 witnesses, right? That really are representatives of the church. And they're killed and they rise again. And we see the church, again, central to God's plans. And here, right, we're going to look today at 7 signs. So you can see these patterns of repeating. And we're going to see, again, the bad things happening. There's that sense of judgment of God. And then we're going to see the church again, the Lamb's army. And next week, Mark's going to look again at 7 bowls, which is, again, another way of looking at the same thing again. And each of these finish with 7th seal, 7th trumpet, 7th sign, 7th bowl, and it's like that's the end. And so we can see they're repeating. So if you get lost in Revelation, you need to kind of work out which story, which story am I looking at that tells the big picture, right? Because each of them tell the same big picture, right? That God is going to bring justice to the earth, that the church is going to be revealed, and then God is going to bring it all to an end at the right time. And so when we're in the middle of looking at one of those pictures. So in a way, what we've talked about this week doesn't necessarily connect, right? The imagery doesn't necessarily connect to what we looked at last week, because it's its own separate picture. It's like its own movie telling the same story, the same big picture. Yeah, it's a little bit like the Gospels. You know, you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. They all tell the story of Jesus, but they all do it from a slightly different angle. And so that's what we're seeing in the book of Revelation. So it's important to realize that when we kick off with we're looking at study, because we can get so lost so quick. All right. Okay. So we're going to, and again, so the point was, what are all these different pictures about? They're reminding them, don't give up, don't give in. The reason we have these pictures is to remind them, don't give up, don't give in. So let's look then at these 7 signs in chapter 12 to 20 to 14. And we're not going to read all the passages today because we just wouldn't have time for that. Okay. But we're now on to looking at, well, what's this story that we're seeing in Revelation? And really, the whole thing is a question of who are you going to worship? That's what this story is about. It's challenging the early readers, and it's challenging us. Are you going to worship the worldly powers, or are you going to worship the Lamb? Are you going to worship Jesus? These are your 2 choices. And so we see this story played out over 3 chapters. And in the first chapter, in chapter 12, we see this big cosmic battle. We see, actually, we start to see the story unfold, and we're kind of taken back to the beginning. We're going to see the dragon revealed and they're going to see this big picture of this big battle taking place. But then the battle sort of zooms in, right? And it zooms into, well, how does that play out on the earth? So how does it work out on the earth? And we're going to see this beast, and we're going to talk about the beast. But then we kind of go, we're taken up again to heaven and say, well, this is what it looks like. This is what you see day to day on the earth, but this is what Jesus sees from heaven. And so the whole question of these 4 chapters is really a challenge to the early church. And it's a challenge to us. Who are we going to worship? Right? So let's dig into the first chapter, the cosmic battle then. So in this chapter 12, we see the story, this next scene, as it were, opens with a woman. And it says that she has 12 stars on her head, around her head, and she's got the radiance of the sun, and she's standing on the moon, and she's with a child. Okay, and then we see a dragon come along, and a dragon tries to attack her and to take the child. Okay, so we've got 3 people. You're like, this is already getting weird. Yeah, okay, but it's a metaphor, it's a picture. Right? So who then, if it's a metaphor and a picture, who then are these people? Well, the first woman, the woman is Israel. It's telling that, remember, we're looking at the cosmic picture here. This is Israel, and out of Israel comes the child, Jesus. And we know that the child is Jesus because it says, I think it's in verse 4, that he comes to rule the nations with a rod of iron, which is a direct quote about Jesus from Psalm 2. And the devil tries to catch Jesus before Jesus can do what he can do. But as we know, Jesus is caught up to heaven. He rises up to heaven. He escapes. And then we've got the dragon. Now, the dragon, we know, and as we see further down, the dragon is Satan. And so this is a picture, really. This first sign is a picture, right, of this great cosmic battle. It's a cosmic battle that's taking place. It's the devil who is seeking to destroy the people of Israel and to take and destroy Jesus. And we know he tried to have Jesus killed at the cross, but he failed because he didn't realize what the cross was going to do. And so what we see is that the devil gets very angry. And he's taken a third of the stars from heaven. If you look in there, it takes a third of the stars, which is the third of the angels. So that's so you've got 2/3 of the angels remain with God, and a third of them remain or go to be with the devil down on the earth. And so this new chapter, the 7 signs, opens with kind of reminding Christians, guys, this is a much bigger story than what you're seeing on the earth. You're facing persecution from the Roman Empire. But let me tell you, there's a much bigger picture going on. And we can feel like that today. We can think, oh, it's hard being a Christian today in England. You know, things aren't going our way. The laws aren't going our way. But we're reminded here, let's take a step back, right? That there's a big picture battle going on. And the first thing we know about this big picture battle is that the dragon loses. He can't defeat Jesus. He fails at his first attempt. And so then what happens, all right, is that then there's a war. It says, so the next section of chapter 12 is there's a war in heaven, and we character called the archangel Michael, and it says that he battles the dragon, who is Satan, and he's called the deceiver. It says it. This is if you're reading with me in your Bible, you'll see this here. And the devil, who is the source of all lies and conspiracy and untruth, is defeated by God's armies. He's defeated and he's flung down to the earth. And so he gets so angry, and he's angry, and so he tries to chase the woman and her children. He tries to destroy her. He tries to attack the church because he's been defeated. He hasn't been able to defeat Jesus, and he can't defeat the heaven's armies, and so he's thrown down onto the earth. And so what we realize is that the devil has already been defeated in the heavenly places. As Christians today, we can be rejoicing in the fact that we are already on the winning team, right? This is what this revelation is trying to say. John's saying, see it, guys, see the big picture. Jesus has won, he's defeated, but there are still battles to fight on the earth, and we see the dragon goes thrown down to the earth. And so we have to defeat and fight the devil on the earth, and he's pursuing the people of God to try and destroy them. And so although he's been defeated on heaven, there's still a battle to fight on earth. And how is that battle fight? And there's a key verse in Revelation chapter 12. How do we win the battles that we face against the dragon and his enemies, Satan and his enemies, in this life? Well, it says they conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. So this is the secret. This is the secret of this chapter, really. So the church is fighting, right? The dragon who's been defeated, and how do they win? How do they conquer him? It says they conquered. Right, they overcame, right? So we as the church, we can beat the devil, right? He's lost to Jesus. He's lost to heaven's armies, and now he's going to lose to the church because they conquered him by the blood of the Lamb. So when you're facing pressure and difficulty in this life, you can be confident that even though the devil might accuse you and say, you're a failure, you're a loser, look at all the mistakes you've made, look at all the messes you've made. You made a mess with this person. You destroyed this thing. You ruined that relationship. You were rubbish at that job. You're not clever. You're not good at this. You're not good at that. You say, do you know what? I am not justified by what I do. I'm not made right with God. I'm not valuable because of what you say. I'm valuable because Jesus died to save me and he loved me. And so we defeat him by bringing the blood of the Lamb. But we also defeat him by the word of our testimony. When the devil comes to accuse us, right? And remember, the devil is the accuser of the brethren. He's the accuser of the brothers. It says this in Revelation. It says he's accuser. It says we beat him by speaking back to him the testimony of our lives. Do you know what? Not only do I not need Jesus to save me and love me, but I've seen God do amazing things in my life, right? If I think about my family, if I think about how God has blessed me with my wonderful wife, the way I've seen God move in the church, I've seen God move in my life. If I look at how I've been changed by the gospel and his love, I throw that back in the devil's face and he's got no answer. But also, and this is the key, they loved not their lives even unto death. And remember this, the context of Revelation, the church is being killed, physically killed for believing in Jesus. And he's saying, you may have to give up your life on earth. You may have to die for your faith. But we're going to see why that's so important and why that allows us to win the real battle, because the real battle isn't on earth. The real battle is not the one that we're fighting today. The real battle, as we've seen, is the cosmic battle. Right? It's the battle between God and Satan, and he's lost. Satan has lost. So that's chapter 12. So we see this cosmic battle playing out. So Satan's been defeated in the heavenly places. He's now being defeated on earth, but he is angry. And it says he was angry. At the end of chapter 12, he was angry with the church. And so he sets out to destroy the church with everything he's got. And so the devil creates these two mighty beasts we're going to see in chapter 13. And so it says the first beast came out of the sea. And no, it wasn't Terry, as some people have indicated. Look, there is the beast from the sea. No. This was a much worse beast than that, although that will shock you if you have seen that. It was this beast. And it's a weird looking beast. Revelation's got some proper weird images, right? So this beast has got the body of a leopard. It's got the face of a lion, the feet of a bear, and it's got this kind of head. And so it's a strange beast. And you think, well, what is the point of this beast, right? Well, as we're going to see, this beast represents the political and military powers that operate in our world. The devil sends these great empires really to oppress the church, to control the world and to bring suffering wherever they can. And you think, well, what's with all this imagery? Well, if you were, as I said, if you were reading this as a first century Christian, you would know your Old Testament a lot better than we do. And you would immediately go, that's from Daniel chapter 7. And in Daniel chapter 7, there are 4 beasts that are described. you've got the lion, the bear, the leopard, and then another kind of very kind of almost non-human beast with kind of iron head and incredible teeth. And it's clear that those beasts that Daniel predicts are different empires. Okay, so the Babylonian Empire was the lion, the Medo-Persian Empire was the bear, the Greek Empire was the leopard, and the really bad beast that comes at the end was the Roman Empire. Okay, and so when we look at, I'm hoping this is going to go the right way. Oh no, if I'm not going to mess it up. Go back, there we are. So when we look at this beast, what John is seeing is like it's really a fusion of all of those empires. It's a fusion, it's like a mixture of all of the worstness of those empires. And what we see is that that the devil loves to create empires that really oppress the church. And if you read through, okay, if you read through this chapter, you will see that these empires they're just oppressive. They kill, they destroy, they use their power to oppress the church. But remember what I was saying about the pattern, right, that reveals God's promises. So Revelation shows us a pattern. So when they would have read this in the first century, they would have thought this is Rome. They're talking, John is seeing the empire of Rome as this beast of power that's seeking to try and control and to kill off the church. But if you're reading this as a Cambodian, right, in around the 1970s, or you would have seen it as Pol Pot, right? Or if you were in Nazi Germany, you could have seen this as the Nazi Germany empire and Hitler. Or you could have seen it, if you were in China, you would have seen it as Mao's communism. Or in Russia, you could have seen it as Stalinism, right? It's the same thing. It's the same sense of military power and might that seeks to oppress people. It's a pattern that we see. And I know some people want to try and, read Revelation like a crystal ball and say, oh, this must be this empire. I don't think it's written like that. I think the Revelation reveals a pattern. It's like a type. Okay, and so we see that the pressure is, and this beast says, if you don't worship me, right, if you don't bow down and worship me, then you will be destroyed. And so the key verse in chapter 13 is this verse. It's verse 10. It says, if anyone is taken captive by this beast, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. And this is the key verse. It's John speaking. Remember the point of why he's writing. He's saying, don't give in and don't give up. Right? Don't give in to compromise and don't give up to persecution. Here is a call for the endurance and the faith of the saints. Even though this empire may be bearing down on the church, don't give up. Don't give in. You may lose your life, and we're going to see why in a second. This earthly battle may cost your life. We're going to see in a moment why you must endure what's promised to you if you're able and willing to go through and endure. So that is chapter 13. But that's the first half of chapter 13. But then what happens in the second half of chapter 13 is we see another beast, a second beast. And this beast is a bit different. It looks like a lamb. Well, it looks like Jesus, but it speaks like a dragon. It has the appearance of being godly, but it speaks out horror and it speaks out atrocity, right? And what we see here is this is a representation of religious power, right? It's religious power, because what this beast does is it performs, in verse 13, you see it performs great signs. In verse 14, it deceives people. In verse 15, it encourages people to make an image of the first beast and to bow down and worship it. And what does it do? It kills anyone that won't worship the image and the idol. And you see, there's a terrible combination that happens in the nations when you get military and political power that combines with religious power. Okay, and it's happened again. It's the pattern that happens throughout history. Okay, you saw it in Daniel's day. You had the Babylon Empire, and Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Tried to worship there's a religious element that say you must worship the emperor as God. And it's the two things. It's political power and military power combined with religious power. That was what happened in the Catholic Church, wasn't it? You had the might of Rome with the religious forces of the popes and the Catholicism as it was back then. Obviously, Catholicism is very different back then as it is now in many places. And so many people died, not just at the hand of the Rome, but the hand of the church. It was the hand of the religious powers. And it's the same if you go to the Fox's Book of Martyrs, you'll see how many people died for that. But it's true in ISIS. It's the same in Islam. You get, if you look, for example, at ISIS, they're trying to establish military and political power, but they're doing it using religious fervor. Okay, and it's the same threat. You could say the same of fascism or white supremacy. Again, what Revelation is showing us here is that there will always be these military political powers that align with religious powers to try and oppress the church. And so what we see at the end of this chapter 13 is we see one of the most infamous images in the whole Bible, and it's this idea of 666, because the second beast wants you to get this mark on your head and on your hands of the mark of the beast. Now, there's been some silliness around this idea. But if you were a first century Christian, you remember John's writing to the first century Christians, you would have immediately understood what this meant, all right? Because there is something in Jewish culture called the Shema. The Shema is about allegiance, okay? And it comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7. And it's where they take the commandments. So this is God saying, he says, these commandments I give to you today are about to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them to your hands and onto your foreheads. And that still happens today in Jewish culture. There's this thing, they call it, I think it's the tefillin, and it's this little box, and they tie it. And so what they do is they write God's words, and they write the commandments into this, into a tiny little scroll, and they put it in a little box. They strap this box to their head, and they've got one on their hand. And it's a mark of allegiance. It's a mark that says, right, I am going to live and breathe this truth. Yeah. So when the first century Christians read this, the mark of the beast, they would have understood it's a mark of allegiance. It's about saying, who do you worship? It's a question of worship. But the other thing they would have understood is that 666 had a very obvious meaning to them, because this doesn't really happen in our writing, but in Hebrew writings, a letter had a number. Okay, a letter had a number. I don't ask me why. I don't know, but it did. And so when you add up the words Nero Caesar, it adds up to the number of 666, which is also in biblical numerology, in biblical numbers, it's one less than 777, which is perfection. We know the number of 7 is perfection and completeness. So 6 represents incompleteness or sin. And so this is like Nero being, right, the embodiment, right, of the beast. He is the embodiment. And so they would have seen this and thought, yes, Nero is the beast. Nero is this beast, and we mustn't take his mark on us. We must have the mark of the Lamb, as we're going to see, on us instead. But you see, again, this is a pattern, right? It's a pattern. There's been many Neros throughout history, many, many Neros, right? You could have said Hitler was a Nero. You could have said Stalin was a Nero. You could have said Pol Pot was a Nero. You could have said one of the different popes was a Nero. There has been many dictators in Africa, or in South America, or even in America. There's always empires and Neros, and they always want you to bow down and worship. And it's exactly the same in our day. We're under pressure today, right, to bow down to the empire and to bow down to the religious. And so if we talked about, for example, particularly I think in our day, there's the pressure of the kind of the social liberalism movement, which basically says that love is the value. And so if you don't bow down, and so it's trying to, and you see it today, there's a real pressure. They're trying to win political power. That's why the American election is kind of important, because it's about whether this group can really get power, and if they can get power, then they can, they can control things. It's the same as it's always been. There's always groups that are trying to get power. But you see this sort of socialist liberalism movement, it's trying to say, well, if you don't agree with tolerance and our values, then you're not going to be able to be part of this. Maybe you can't have a job in this organization if you don't agree with what we agree with. And they make it very religious by almost saying it's about love, and it's a moral agenda. You have to agree with tolerance because it's a moral agenda. It's the same thing as it's always been. And I think that's what, as Christians, we can be encouraged. What we're facing today is nothing different. It's nothing new. And we have to challenge ourselves. Who do we worship? And so, again, as I said, it's history's pattern which reveals God's promises. So that's chapter 13. So we've seen this big battle, and then we've gone down to earth and seen we're battling the empires. We're battling religious forces that are trying to make us worship these beasts. But then we come to chapter 14, and we're now taken up to heaven again. And in heaven, we see the Lamb's army, and there's 144,000 people who are worshipping God. And it's like the number 144,000 isn't a literal number, I believe. It's a symbolic number for the complete people of God. So it's the complete people of God, and they're all worshipping God. And what do they have? It says in chapter 14, they have a mark on their foreheads. They have a name written on it, and it's the name of the Lamb and the name of the Father. They have a mark. It's not the mark of the beast, it's the mark of God. And they're singing and worshiping with a song that no one else can know until you've got it. And so this is encouraging them. Like this, see the picture. This is the church in its glory. Right? You may have suffered, and if you've suffered and you've died for your faith, this is where you're going to go. You're going to go to be with the complete people of God, worshiping the Lamb in heaven. You can endure because this is your future. Right? And then we see the next bit of chapter 13, we see these three angels, and these three angels come and they have these messages. And if you're reading with me in the chapter, and these messages are they're quite simple, really. The first one says, you need to fear God and give him glory. You need to fear God and give him glory. That's where the first angel comes. He comes to declare, fear God and give him glory. Because, number two, Babylon, this worldly power, these beasts, have fallen. Their time has come. They may have had time on the earth to rule and oppress the church, but their time has come. In the end, they lose. And do not worship the beast. Don't give in to him, or you will face the wrath of God. These are powerful messages. And what the angels are basically saying is, Jesus wins. Right? Jesus wins. You need to see it. Not only if you endure, you will go to heaven and you will be on the winning side. Do you not see it? Do you not see that you're going to be on the winning side? And then the final sign in chapter 14 is this, that we see Jesus with this sickle who reaps the earth, and he takes up and he draws up all of those people who have not bowed down to the beast, and he takes them to be with him. This is like the final end of all things, and the final end of all those things, all those people that are still living, that still haven't bowed down, that haven't died and gone up to be with Jesus, with the 144,000, they are reaped together, and they're together with Christ in heaven eternally. And so this is the big picture. And so what he's trying to say, the big picture of chapter 14 is, we know there's, sorry, let me take you back 1 second. Chapter 12 says there's a cosmic battle. It's much bigger than you can see, guys. What you're seeing is chapter 13, where the beasts of empire and religion are oppressing you, and they're persecuting you, they're killing you for believing, they're trying to force you to worship them. But you mustn't give in, because you've got to see what's waiting for you. The Lamb who reigns on heaven, you will have a new name. You'll sing a new song. You'll see that Jesus wins in the end, and Jesus reaps those who are his. And so we come to the key verse of chapter 14. Here is a call for what? The endurance of the saints. Keep going, guys. This is John's message to the church. Keep going. This is what chapter 12, 14 is all about. It's like, keep going. I know it's hard. Don't give up. Don't give in. Yeah, and it's the same for us. The pattern we see today represents God's promise for always. It's always the same. There's always been empires. There always will be empires. Keep going. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints and for those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice in heaven saying, write this, Blessed are those are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labours and their deeds follow them. We know that we will receive rest if we can endure. And so, as I said right at the beginning, this is a church that's under pressure. They're facing persecution. They're facing the pressure to compromise. And so this chapter 12 to 14 is a really clear message. Don't give up and don't give in to the mark of the beast. Don't bow down and worship the pressures and the things of this world. So what do we learn from Revelation? What have we learned? Like so far, all the way up to this point, we've learned this. Revelation reveals patterns of history and the church. We see it's the same thing. When we read Revelation, we think we don't need to try and work out whether this one was Hitler and this one was Rome and this one was Babylon. It's not. That's not the point. The point is it's a pattern. We see a pattern that the devil loses. He tries to oppress the church using empire and religion, but the church wins because Jesus wins. Revelation gives us the confidence to stand up to the pressures of this world. When we're challenged, will you wear, say, for example, like a gay pride badge? That is a mark, I think, in a way, of the worldly empires we live in. When we're asked to agree with things that we don't want to agree with because we don't think they're right, we realize we can have the confidence to stand up to the pressures of this world. But Revelation also gives us an awareness of the persecution being part of the package. But Revelation also gives us assurance about the promises of God, that those who love him will be with him forever and ever and ever, and will be in heaven in glory. And this is what Revelation is talking about. There's lots of clever symbolism, but really this is the simple message. So let me just pray. Dear Lord, we thank you that Revelation teaches us that we can endure because you win in the end. And I don't need to pray anything else. And I just want to, I suppose I just want to pray this. I want to pray of anyone that's maybe feeling pressure to give up or to give in. Maybe they're under pressure from work to compromise, or they're under pressure from family to not stand up for their faith. We want to pray that you would fill our church with confidence, and you'd fill our church with a sense of just wanting to see what you are doing in this time, in this moment. You would give us the strength to stand and not give in and bow down to the world, but to stand up for you, Jesus, knowing that if we do, and we may be persecuted for it, that you love us and you will lift us up to be with you in the end. Amen. Amen. So